My brothers and sisters, listen to me carefully. You keep saying, I miss them. But if I am honest with you, and honesty is mercy, you do not miss them the way you think you do. What you miss is who you were when they were there. What you miss is how safe you felt. What you miss is the version of yourself that believed things would stay the same. And this is why letting go hurts so deeply. Not because you lost them, but because you lost an identity that was attached to them. If you do not understand this, you will keep reopening a wound that Allah is trying to heal. At the beginning, nothing feels wrong. It never starts as dependence. It starts as connection. You share time because it feels natural. You share routines because life flows easier together. You share emotional space because being understood feels rare and comforting. There is no warning sign, no inner alarm, no moment where you consciously say, I am losing myself. That is exactly why this process is dangerous. It happens quietly, slowly. You stop making decisions the way you used to. You begin to measure your days by their presence. Your schedule adjusts around them without resistance. Your emotional state becomes sensitive to their tone, their availability, their mood. At this stage, you still believe you are independent, but you are not noticing the shift that has already begun. Your happiness no longer rises from within. It reacts. If they are present, you feel grounded. If they are distant, you feel unsettled. If they are pleased, you feel light. If they withdraw, you feel heavy. This is the moment attachment starts turning into identity. You are no longer just you. You are the one who has them. And that role begins to define how you see yourself. Your worth feels affirmed through being chosen. Your stability feels reinforced through being needed. Your future starts forming around the assumption of their permanence. But permanence does not belong to people. This is where the danger lies. Not because attachment itself is sinful or wrong, but because humans are temporary, inconsistent, and fragile. Every human connection exists under the will of Allah, not under your expectations. When your peace borrows stability from another person, it becomes borrowed peace. And borrowed peace can be taken back at any moment. This is why Allah allows separation. Not always because something was haram. Not always because someone was evil. Not always because you made a mistake. Sometimes Allah removes someone because your heart leaned where it was not meant to rest. People misunderstand this. They think loss is always punishment. But that is a shallow understanding of divine wisdom. Sometimes removal is mercy before collapse. When Allah sees that your identity is slowly being outsourced to another human being, He intervenes, not to hurt you, but to protect what is more valuable, your spiritual center. Because if identity continues to attach itself to people, it eventually detaches from Allah. And that is not something He allows to continue unchecked. When someone leaves and your inner world collapses, that collapse is not caused by the person, it is caused by exposure. Their absence simply reveals where your foundation was placed. Think carefully about this. If someone exits your life and you feel sadness, that is normal. If someone exits your life and you feel grief, that is human. But if someone exits your life and you feel erased, lost, or hollow, then the issue is no longer about love, it is about identity. That pain is not saying I lost them. It is saying I don't know who I am without them. And this is what makes letting go feel unbearable, because you are not only losing a person, you are losing a version of yourself that existed in relation to them, a version that felt secure, seen, familiar, and anchored. Your mind resists this loss because identity loss feels like threat. The nervous system interprets it as danger. The heart interprets it as abandonment. But Allah sees it differently. Allah sees that your identity was becoming fragile. Allah sees that your peace was no longer self-sustaining. Allah sees that you were building emotional permanence on a temporary creation. So He removes, not suddenly, always. Sometimes gradually, sometimes painfully, sometimes in ways you do not understand until much later. And here is the hard truth that must be said clearly. If your sense of self collapses when someone leaves, then your identity was never anchored correctly. Anchoring identity in Allah does not mean you do not love people. It means love does not define your existence. It means Connection does not replace submission. It means relationships enrich your life, but they do not hold it together. When identity is anchored correctly, loss still hurts, but it does not destroy. Sadness comes, but purpose remains. Grief passes through, but faith stays intact. When identity is anchored incorrectly, loss feels like free fall. Prayer feels heavy. Clarity disappears. Life feels disoriented. This is not weakness. This is misplacement. And Allah, in His mercy, does not allow misplacement to become permanent damage. That is why letting go hurts, because it exposes where your heart was leaning. And exposure is always uncomfortable, but it is also the beginning of correction. If you understand this lesson, you stop blaming yourself. You stop romanticizing the pain. You stop begging the past to return. Instead, you begin the real work, rebuilding identity where it was always meant to rest. Not in someone who could leave, not in a role that could end, but in the one who never leaves and never changes. And when that realignment begins, the pain does not vanish instantly, but it starts to make sense. And pain that makes sense no longer controls you. Most people think heartbreak is about love. That is the surface explanation. It sounds poetic and it feels convincing, but it is incomplete. What you are actually grieving is the loss of a role you were living inside. Before the separation, you were not just yourself. You were someone in someone else's life. You were the one who was checked on, the one who was considered, the one whose messages mattered, the one whose presence had a place. That role gave your life structure. Your days had context. Your efforts had direction. Your sacrifices felt meaningful because they were tied to something shared. When that role ends, the pain is not only emotional, it is existential. You wake up and something is missing, but you cannot name it clearly. It is not just the person, it is the position you occupied in the world. The mind does not say, I lost my role. The mind says, I miss them. But that is an oversimplification. What you miss is being needed. What you miss is being chosen. What you miss is having a place that felt secure and predictable. This is why the pain feels disorienting, because when a role disappears, the mind enters uncertainty. And the human mind fears uncertainty more than pain. Pain at least has familiarity. Uncertainty does not. So the mind tries to restore the old role. It replays conversations. It imagines different outcomes. It asks questions that have no answers. It waits for messages that may never come. Not because the past was perfect, but because the role was familiar. Familiarity feels like safety, even when it wasn't healthy. This is a critical point many people miss. You are not longing for the person as they truly were. You are longing for the stability that the role provided. That is why you can miss someone who hurt you. That is why you can miss someone who was inconsistent. That is why logic tells you one thing, but your heart pulls another way. Because logic sees the person, but the heart remembers the role. The role told you who you were in relation to the world. I am someone's priority. I am someone's future. I am someone's responsibility. When that ends, the mind panics and asks a terrifying question. If I am no longer that, then who am I now? This is where the grief deepens. Not because you lost love, but because you lost orientation. Your identity was partially organized around that role. Your future planning quietly included it. Your emotional investment assumed its continuation. And when Allah removes a role, He removes certainty with it. This is why you feel ungrounded. You are not broken, you are unassigned. And being unassigned feels frightening because it forces you to face yourself without external definition. Many people try to escape this stage. They rush into new attachments. They distract themselves with noise. They seek replacement roles instead of healing. But replacement does not heal identity loss. It only postpones it. Allah allows this discomfort for a reason, because roles given by people are temporary by nature. Roles given by Allah are permanent in meaning, even if they change in form. When your sense of worth is tied to being someone's choice, you become vulnerable to collapse the moment that choice is withdrawn. This is why Allah reclaims roles that are carrying too much weight, not to humiliate you, not to strip you of dignity, but to remind you that your value was never dependent on occupying someone else's life. Your value existed before the role. It remains after the role. But you cannot see this clearly while you are still grieving the position. This is also why closure feels so important to you. You think you need answers from them. What you actually want is permission to release the role. You want them to confirm that you mattered. You want the ending to validate the meaning of what you played. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Closure does not come from conversation. It comes from acceptance. Acceptance that the role has ended. Acceptance that its ending does not erase your worth. Acceptance that Allah allowed it to finish because it was no longer aligned with who you are becoming. If the role was meant to continue, Allah would have sustained it. If it was meant to evolve, Allah would have guided it. If it was meant to return, Allah would have reopened the door. When none of that happens, silence itself becomes instruction. The longer you resist this, the longer the pain lingers. Not because you are weak, but because you are trying to hold on to a definition that no longer exists. Healing begins when you stop asking, why did they leave? And start asking, who am I without this role? This question is uncomfortable, but it is transformative. Because once you answer it, you stop needing the past to validate you. You stop chasing explanations. You stop negotiating with memory. You stop begging the old role to reappear. And something important happens. Your identity begins to stand on its own again, not as someone's partner, not as someone's future, not as someone's emotional anchor, but as a servant of Allah, whole and complete. When that happens, the pain does not disappear overnight, but it loses its power because you are no longer grieving the loss of yourself. You are reclaiming it. And once identity is reclaimed, letting go stops feeling like loss. It starts feeling like release. When someone leaves your life and your identity has already been attached, your memory stops being neutral. This is something most people do not want to accept because we like to believe our memories are honest. We trust them. We replay them. We lean on them as evidence. But memory is not a recorder. Memory is a storyteller. And when identity is threatened, memory becomes biased. The moment separation happens, your sense of self feels unstable. Something that helped define who you were is gone. And the mind's first instinct is not truth, it is survival. So memory steps in to protect attachment. It begins to edit. It does not invent things out of nothing, but it rearranges reality. It magnifies warmth and minimizes harm. It highlights moments of closeness and quietly removes moments of neglect. It brings back laughter, shared silence, inside jokes, but it skips over disrespect, inconsistency, emotional absence, and unresolved pain. This is why you feel torn. Part of you knows it ended for a reason. Another part of you keeps saying, but it wasn't all bad. And that second voice is memory trying to preserve an identity that no longer exists. You must understand this clearly. When identity is threatened, the mind will lie to keep it alive. Not because you are dishonest, but because the ego fears collapse. You remember how you felt, not how you were treated. You remember how things started, not how they ended. You remember potential, not reality. This is why people say they changed when often the truth is, I stopped ignoring who they always were. But memory resists that truth because accepting it would force you to release the version of yourself that believed in the story. And stories are powerful. The story says we were special. The story says what we had was rare. The story says if it ended, it must be my fault or a mistake. But Allah does not end what is truly aligned without wisdom. When memory lies, it does something even more subtle. It turns the past into an idealized place of safety. You begin to think, at least then I knew who I was. At least then I felt chosen. At least then life made sense. So the pain you feel now is not only grief, it is comparison. Your present self feels unfamiliar, uncertain, exposed. Your past self feels stable, known, grounded. So memory invites you back there. Not because it was better, but because it was familiar. And familiarity is seductive. This is why you can miss a period of your life that was emotionally unhealthy. This is why you can long for someone who caused you confusion. This is why you can feel attached even when logic says letting go is necessary. Because memory is protecting familiarity, not truth. And here is the danger if this is not understood. If you believe memory without questioning it, you will start doubting Allah's wisdom. You will ask, why would Allah remove something that felt so meaningful? You will say, maybe I should have tried harder. You will wonder, what if I ruined something that was meant to last? But Allah is not confused. If something was meant to remain, He would not have allowed its ending to be necessary for your growth. If something was meant to sustain you, it would not have destabilized your faith, your peace, or your sense of self. Memory does not see the full picture. Allah does. Memory is emotional. Allah is all-knowing. This is why you must be careful not to worship your recollection. The past does not become sacred simply because it hurts to release it. Pain does not automatically mean value. Intensity does not automatically mean truth. Sometimes the strongest emotions are attached to the deepest misplacements. Allah allows memory to resurface so you can learn, not so you can return. Every time a memory appears, ask yourself honestly, is this memory calling me forward or pulling me backward? Is it inviting healing or reinforcing attachment? Is it aligned with who I am becoming or who I am afraid to let go of? When you begin questioning memory instead of obeying it, something shifts. You stop romanticizing the past. You stop negotiating with old versions of yourself. You stop confusing emotional charge with divine permission. You begin to see more clearly. You remember the discomfort you ignored. You remember the prayers that felt heavy. You remember the moments where your heart knew something was off, but your attachment silenced it. And suddenly, the narrative changes. You stop saying, why did this happen to me? You start saying, why was I holding on to something that was quietly undoing me? This is not bitterness, this is clarity. And clarity is a form of mercy. When memory stops lying, identity starts stabilizing. You no longer need the past to explain who you are. You no longer need to revisit old chapters to feel real. You no longer fear the present version of yourself because now your identity is no longer being defended by illusion. It is being rebuilt on truth. And once truth takes its place, the memories lose their power. They become lessons, not anchors. And that is when real letting go begins. One of the most common questions people ask during loss is this. If letting go is good for me, why does it hurt this much? The answer is not emotional, it is structural. Letting go hurts because something inside you is ending. Not just a relationship, not just a connection, but a version of yourself that existed because of it. And endings always feel like death before they feel like healing. When people hear the word death, they think only of the body. But there are other kinds of death that are just as real and sometimes more painful. The death of identity, the death of expectation, the death of imagined futures. You are not only releasing a person, you are releasing plans that never had a chance to happen. You are releasing conversations that will never occur. You are releasing a version of life you mentally rehearsed over and over. That is why the pain feels overwhelming. Your mind is not only grieving what happened, it is grieving what could have been. And because that future felt real in your heart, losing it feels like losing something tangible. This is where many people become confused. They think, if this was right for me, it shouldn't hurt so much. But pain is not the measure of alignment. Pain is the measure of attachment. The more deeply your identity was tied to something, the more painful its ending will feel. Not because it was healthy, but because it occupied a central place in your inner world. Letting go, then, is not an act of forgetting. It is an act of dying to an old self. And death, even when it leads to life, is never gentle. This is why Allah does not rush healing. He allows grief to unfold in stages. He allows the ache to rise and fall. He allows you to feel disoriented for a time. Not because He wants you to suffer, but because transformation cannot be rushed without becoming shallow. A wound that is ignored does not heal. It hardens. So Allah allows the pain to surface fully. He allows the tears. He allows the questions. He allows the exhaustion because suppression delays resurrection. Many people try to skip this stage. They tell themselves to be strong too quickly. They distract themselves with noise. They replace one attachment with another. But avoidance does not prevent pain. It preserves it. What you resist emotionally remains active beneath the surface. This is why you may feel fine during the day, but break down at night. Why moments of quiet suddenly feel unbearable. Why reminders hit harder when you least expect them. Because the old self has not been released yet. And here is the part that must be said clearly. Letting go feels like death because the ego is losing control. The ego does not want to dissolve. It wants continuity. It wants familiarity. It wants to survive unchanged. So it resists. It whispers doubts. It creates longing. It magnifies loss. It tells you that letting go means you will be empty forever. But that is not truth. That is fear. The ego fears emptiness because it mistakes it for annihilation. But in reality, emptiness is space. And space is where Allah places what is next. Allah does not fill what is already occupied. If your heart is still holding tightly to the past, it has no room to receive the present. This is why letting go must feel like loss before it feels like freedom. Because freedom requires space, and space requires release. There is another reason letting go feels so painful. When you let go, you lose the illusion of control. While the attachment existed, you believed that effort could fix things, that patience could save things, that love could sustain things. Letting go forces you to accept a hard truth. Some things end not because you failed, but because they were never meant to continue. Accepting this truth humbles the soul. It reminds you that not everything is within your power, that outcomes are not yours to decide. That trust must replace control. And the ego does not like this. So it grieves loudly, but grief is not an enemy. Grief is proof that something mattered. But it is also proof that something must now change. If you sit with the grief instead of fighting it, something important happens. The intensity begins to soften. The sharp edges round out. The waves become less violent. You begin to notice moments of clarity between the pain. And in those moments, you realize something surprising. You are still here. The pain did not destroy you. The loss did not erase you. The ending did not end you. This realization is the beginning of healing. Because once you see that the old self can die and you can still breathe, still function, still pray, still exist, fear loosens its grip. You no longer cling desperately. You no longer panic at every reminder. You no longer confuse pain with danger. You begin to trust the process. And trust is what allows resurrection. Allah does not take something away without the intention of replacing it. Not always with something similar, but with something truer. But replacement does not arrive in a crowded heart. It arrives after release. So if letting go feels like death, do not be alarmed. It means a chapter is closing at the level it was living in you. And after every sincere death of the ego, there is a rebirth of the soul. Not instantly, not dramatically, but truthfully. And that truth, once it settles, brings a peace that no attachment ever could. This is the lesson many people resist the most because it requires honesty without excuses. Not every loss is about wrongdoing. Not every separation is about betrayal. Not every ending is about failure. Sometimes Allah removes something simply because it began to occupy a place it was never meant to hold. Competition with Allah does not always look dramatic. It does not always look like abandoning prayer or rejecting faith. Often it looks subtle, quiet, gradual. It looks like your heart turning first to a person before it turns to Allah. It looks like your peace depending on a message instead of remembrance. It looks like your hope rising and falling based on human behavior. Nothing outwardly sinful may be happening, but inwardly reliance is shifting. And reliance belongs only to Allah. You may still pray, you may still believe, but emotionally something else has started to matter more. You begin to say, I trust Allah, but your calm only arrives when that person reassures you. You say, Allah is sufficient, but your fear spikes when that connection feels unstable. You say, Allah knows best, but your heart panics at the thought of losing them. This is not hypocrisy. It is human vulnerability. But Allah does not leave vulnerability uncorrected when it threatens the heart. Because the heart was created to rest in Him, not in creation. When something begins to compete with Allah for emotional authority, Allah intervenes. Not harshly, not immediately, but decisively. He may allow distance to grow. He may allow circumstances to change. He may allow misunderstandings to surface. He may allow silence to replace certainty. From your perspective, it feels like loss. From His perspective, it is realignment. This is where people misunderstand divine wisdom. They say, why would Allah take away something that brought me comfort? Because comfort that replaces trust is not comfort. It is dependency. And dependency on creation always leads to eventual collapse. Allah does not want your heart split. He does not want your peace outsourced. He does not want your identity anchored to something fragile. So He removes what competes, not because the person was evil, not because the relationship was fake, but because the weight it carried in your heart became unsafe. Think carefully about this. If something leaves your life and takes your faith with it, then that thing was never neutral. If something leaves and your connection to Allah weakens instead of deepens, then that thing had grown too large. Allah does not strip hearts for punishment. He strips them for protection. This is why some endings feel spiritually confusing. You say, I was doing everything right. Why did this still happen? Because obedience is not only about actions, it is also about attachment. You can obey outwardly while leaning inwardly. And Allah corrects both. This correction hurts because it exposes misplaced reliance. It forces you to sit with the question you were avoiding. Where was my heart actually resting? And when that question is answered honestly, the pain begins to make sense. Allah is not jealous like creation, but He is protective. He knows that anything you lean on more than Him will eventually disappoint you. Not because it is malicious, but because it is limited. People change. Circumstances shift. Emotions fluctuate. Allah does not. So when He removes something that competed with Him, He is not leaving you empty. He is clearing interference. This is why after deep loss, many people experience a strange return to sincerity. Their prayers become quieter but deeper. Their dua becomes less demanding and more trusting. Their hearts soften in ways they did not expect. The removal creates space. Space for humility, space for reflection, space for dependence to return to its rightful place. At first, this space feels like loneliness, but loneliness and emptiness are not the same. Loneliness is the absence of people. Emptiness is the absence of meaning. Allah removes people to prevent emptiness, not to cause it. When you stop fighting the loss and start listening to what it revealed, you begin to see the wisdom. You begin to notice how often you were seeking reassurance from them instead of certainty from Allah. How often your mood depended on their availability. How often your future felt safe only because you imagined them in it. This awareness is uncomfortable, but it is cleansing. Because once you see it, you can correct it. And when reliance returns to Allah, something remarkable happens. The pain does not disappear immediately, but fear loses its authority. You no longer feel desperate. You no longer feel abandoned. You no longer feel like something essential was stolen from you. Instead, you feel grounded. Grounded not because life is perfect, but because your heart is no longer divided. Allah does not remove what you need. He removes what you are leaning on incorrectly. And once that correction settles, you realize something important. What left did not take your strength. It revealed where your strength truly comes from. And when strength returns to its source, nothing that leaves can break you again. One of the strongest illusions people cling to after loss is the belief that closure will heal them. They say, if I could just talk to them one last time, if I could just understand why, if I could just hear the truth. But listen carefully. Closure is not a conversation. Closure is a decision. The belief that another person holds the key to your peace is itself a continuation of attachment. It keeps your healing dependent on someone who is no longer part of your life. And Allah does not design healing to be outsourced. When a door closes and remains closed, that permanence is not cruelty. It is instruction. If Allah wanted further explanation, He would have allowed further communication. If Allah wanted reconciliation, He would have softened hearts on both sides. If Allah wanted repair, He would have created pathways for it. When none of this happens, silence itself becomes the answer. People resist this because silence feels unfinished. It leaves the ego uncomfortable. The mind wants narrative, it wants logic, it wants symmetry. But Allah does not always heal through explanation. Sometimes He heals through removal. Closure asks, why did this happen? Realignment asks, where is my heart now being redirected? That is the difference. You keep replaying the past because your inner alignment has not yet shifted. You are still emotionally positioned where you were before the ending. This is why reminders hurt. This is why unanswered questions feel heavy. This is why you feel like something is incomplete. Not because you lack information, but because you have not yet accepted the new direction. Acceptance is not approval. It is surrender. Surrender to the reality that what ended is no longer yours to carry. Surrender to the understanding that explanations are not always beneficial. Surrender to the wisdom that Allah sees what you cannot. Many people believe closure will bring relief. In truth, it often brings new wounds. Conversations reopen emotions. Explanations trigger defensiveness. Apologies, even when given, rarely heal identity loss. Because the pain was never about misunderstanding. It was about misalignment. Realignment is internal work. It is the slow process of moving your emotional center away from the past and back into the present. It is retraining the heart to rest where Allah has placed you now, not where you once were. This is not done through answers. It is done through acceptance. Acceptance that the relationship served its purpose. Acceptance that its ending was part of a larger design. Acceptance that your growth required release. When you resist this, you stay suspended between chapters. You are no longer in the past, but you have not fully entered the present. This in-between space is where suffering multiplies. Realignment pulls you out of this space. It asks you to take responsibility for where your heart rests today. It asks you to stop waiting for validation from a source that has been removed. It asks you to stop negotiating with what Allah has already decided. This is difficult because the ego interprets acceptance as defeat. But acceptance is not giving up. It is letting go of illusion. When you accept that closure is not coming in the form you imagined, something shifts. You stop checking, you stop hoping, you stop rehearsing. Not because you are cold, but because you are clear. And clarity brings relief. You begin to invest emotional energy back into yourself. You return to your prayers with presence, not desperation. You start rebuilding routines that exist independent of anyone else. This is realignment in action. You are no longer asking, what did I lose? You are asking, what am I being prepared for? This question changes everything, because when the heart realigns with Allah's decree, it stops fighting reality. And fighting reality is what exhausts the soul. Realignment also restores dignity. You stop feeling like you were abandoned. You stop feeling like you were discarded. You stop feeling like you were left behind. Instead, you recognize that you were redirected. Allah does not redirect without purpose. He does not close doors without guiding elsewhere. He does not remove attachments without offering something deeper in return. But the return does not come while you are still facing backward. Closure keeps you facing the past. Realignment turns you forward. And once you face forward, you realize something important. Peace was never waiting for you in an explanation. It was waiting for you in acceptance. When you accept that Allah's decision is final and wise, even when painful, the heart begins to rest again. Not because everything makes sense, but because trust has replaced resistance. And when trust settles, healing follows. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. And steady healing lasts. My brothers and sisters, listen to this carefully and carry it with you. You are not broken because something ended. You are not weak because letting go hurt. You are not lost because a chapter closed. What you experienced was a correction, not a rejection. You did not lose your worth when they left. You did not lose your future when the role ended. You did not lose yourself forever. You were called back to yourself. You don't miss them. You miss who you were when life felt familiar. But familiarity is not destiny. Allah does not remove what is essential to you. He removes what you were leaning on incorrectly. And when you release what was never meant to carry your identity, something powerful happens. Your heart becomes lighter. Your faith becomes steadier. Your identity returns to its rightful place. Let go, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Trust the wisdom behind the loss. Trust the timing of the healing. Trust that what Allah is preparing for you requires the space that was created. What left did not take your strength. It revealed where your strength truly comes from. And once your heart rests there again, nothing that leaves can destroy you.